Story 1. Something is in the woods in upstate New York. I live in upstate New York, and a few years back my friends and I decided to recreate one of our favorite shows growing up in the 90s, called Are You Afraid of the Dark? We were going to build ourselves a fire pit out in the woods, throw some logs around it, and tell some scary stories once it became dark, as they did in the show. That day, we went into the woods on the edge of town and found what appeared to be an old path. We decided to follow that because it would make navigating easier once it got dark later. After walking for close to 15 minutes, we realized we weren't on a path anymore. Deciding to keep going a little bit further, we ended up stumbling upon what looked like an abandoned campsite. There were a few tents all ripped to shreds, clothes hanging from tree branches, and a couple of those fabric lawn chairs that had also been torn to hell. Thinking it was a perfect setting for what we had planned for later that night, we found a small clearing about 20 or so feet away, and started digging out the fire pit and moving the logs into position. As we were doing that, we all noticed the feeling of being watched from over in the direction of that campsite. Chalking it up to our imaginations, we kept going. About an hour or so later, we were done. We got back on the path and headed back to our friend's house until nightfall. Once it hit around 10 p.m., we headed into the woods. It took us a while in the dark to find the path we had used earlier that day, and once we got on it, we had that same feeling of being watched again, this time from what felt like every direction. We only had a cheap flashlight and our phones, so we weren't able to see too far ahead of us. About 5 minutes in, we heard what sounded like a very thick branch get snapped in half. This made us uneasy, but we weren't going to turn around over a branch. Finally reaching the ripped-up campsite, we made our way into the clearing we had set up our fire pit in, and started the fire. We all sat down around it, and my friend John began telling his story. A few minutes into it, I kept hearing what sounded like footsteps running behind me. Thinking it was probably just an animal, I ignored it. Another few minutes pass, John finishes his story. Sam begins telling his, but now the footsteps seem to be coming from different directions, all heading to our clearing. Sam stops talking, we listen in silence. Nothing. It's dead silent. Then all of a sudden, it sounds as though we're surrounded. There's footsteps running on all sides of us. They would come from a distance, then stop at the edge of our clearing. Then start again from another direction towards us. We're shining our phones into the woods, but we're not seeing anything. The footsteps keep going. Branches are snapping and leaves are crunching all around us. Something is out there, and it's toying with us. Then once again, silence. Everything feels still, the air feels calm. At this point we had all moved in closer to one another, and we hear nothing for a good 2 or 3 minutes. Then we hear this high-pitched giggle. It sounded like it came from a little girl. We shine our only flashlight in the direction of it, and there's the campsite. But there's no one there. At this point, we're huddled together. We begin whispering back and forth, making plans to stomp out the fire and run to the path, then we'd make runs straight out of the woods. We count down. 3, 2 seconds go by, we're dreading saying it. We begin again. 3, 2, 1, we stomp out the fire, and we sprint towards the path, making sure not lose sight of one another. Where's the path? It's supposed to be here? And where's Sam? Sam, we hear nothing. Do we go back, or do we keep running? We hear what sounds like someone behind us. It's not Sam. About 30 feet to our left, we hear what sounds like someone falling. We hear Sam yell to us. We run over. He had tripped and fallen down a small embankment. We get him up, and just aimlessly start sprinting. We must have dropped the flashlight, so the only light we have is the moon above us. We can barely see, we can't find the path, all we hear is the sounds of our breathing and footsteps behind us. So we run, and we don't stop. We're lost. Where do we go? We see a clearing up ahead, there's something in it. Getting closer, we see what looks like a stone well, with a massive piece of wood covering it. The footsteps stop at the edge of the clearing. The well gives us an uneasy feeling, as though it was covered to keep something in. We take off again, running for what feels like our lives. We finally make it out. We're in a field, with a road at the edge of it. We get halfway through the field, and stop for a second to catch our breath. We felt safe, we'd see whatever had been chasing us from where we were, if it came out of the woods. But it didn't. We got onto the road and started walking into town. We got back to our friend's house and realized just how torn up we were. We're all covered in scratches, and Sam was bleeding pretty badly from his tumble, but we were alive. I'm not sure what we encountered that night in the woods, but it was a feeling of fear that I've never experienced before, and hope to never experience again. And if you're ever out in the woods of upstate New York, and you come across an old ripped-up campsite, turn and run. I sure wish we had. Story 2. Why I never shop organic. I will never shop at a fruit market ever again. Fuck it, I'd be shocked if I could even stomach fruit after this. Just thinking about a strawberry makes me dry heave. Let me introduce myself a little first. I'm a 20-year-old college student with an immeasurable amount of debt because of my studies, and that along with my on-campus dorm room results and very little money left for food. Now it's no surprise college students are poor, but my own personal goal was to not be poor and fat. No way in hell was I gaining that freshman 15. So I made a trip to the supermarkets. Now don't get me wrong, the fruit wasn't expensive, but being on a budget you want that to stretch as far as it can, right? I convinced myself that the fruits were drowning in pesticides or wouldn't ripen well or were bruised or damaged, so I left with an empty basket and headed off to the market. Now, this wasn't my first time going to a fruit market. My father and I used to frequent them a lot when I was younger, but it was my first time going to this fruit market in particular. I made the 4-block bike ride from the supermarket to the market, and immediately was relieved when I saw the pricing. It was so much cheaper than the supermarkets, guys. I made my way through the aisles, picking up a bunch of bananas here, 2 avocados there, a punnet of cherry tomatoes, and so on. By the time I made it to the last stall, I was about ready to ride home with my fresh, probably pesticide-free fruits and veg, until the strawberries from his stall table caught my eye. By now everyone was repacking their fruits to sell the next day, but before the man could pack away that one last punnet of strawberries, I decided I needed them. If I'm being entirely honest, the strawberries didn't look amazing, but by then every other seller had already packed up their produce and were ready to drive back to wherever they call home. Some of them were on the verge of being ripe, while others were on the verge of being so ripe that within 48 hours they would be sporting mold. I asked him how much he wanted, but he replied with just take M. Wouldn't be able to sell M tomorrow anyway. I forgot to mention it when I was describing the strawberries before, but their outer seeds were huge. You know the seeds on the outside of a strawberry? Times that by like 5. I tried to Google an image, but nothing came up that looks like them, and I really don't know how to describe them other than the normal seeds tripled, maybe even quadrupled in size. I didn't see this as a red flag because from what I could remember all the other strawberries at the market looked like this too. I thought maybe it was just how they grew without pesticides this time of year, so I brushed it off and rode home. By the time I got back to my dorm it was around 5:30 p.m., so I headed to the kitchen and started making myself a fresh fruit platter for dinner, because I'm an adult and I felt like it. I can't help myself, so while cutting the bananas and melons I had about half the punnet of strawberries. Even though some of them looked a little shabby, they were one of the best punnets I've ever eaten. I made a note of going back within the week and picking up a couple more punnets, they were that good. I only started freaking out a little when I started cutting the rest of the punnet for the fruit salad. The seeds started falling off super easily, and I was worrying a little because I'd never dealt with seeds falling of strawberries before. I googled something along the lines of seeds falling of strawberries normal, and one of the first pages said it's completely fine for the seeds to fall off, so I breathed a sigh of relief and kept cutting them, just blaming it on the fact they are organic or out of season or whatever. While on the site it also said that the seeds contain a high amount of fiber, and I go to hell with it and chucked all the loose seeds in too. More fiber, right? I sat down and ate my fruit salad and everything was fine for the most part. I noticed at one point the seeds would be gritty, then after pressuring them between my teeth they would click and pop slightly, becoming weak and leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. I decided to just eat the other fruits and the cut strawberries after that, leaving all the seeds in the bowl. I left the bowl on the bench and headed off to my room to watch a movie and shower. About halfway through the movie I fell asleep, and I woke up at 2 a.m. with horrible stomach cramps. At first I thought it was my period coming early, but after a couple minutes of twisting and turning in bed I realized it was coming from my upper stomach, not my lower stomach where cramps would be. I then blamed it my stupid decision of eating fruit for dinner after a burrito for lunch, as the fruit digests quicker and was obviously making me feel like shit. I got back to sleep but only for about an hour and a half before the pain became unbearable. I was on the toilet trying to just get it out of me, but nothing was happening, and I decided going to the emergency room was probably the best option at this point. I got changed into some slightly more decent clothes, and while changing noticed little bumps appearing all over the skin near my chest. Only then occurred to me I might be having an allergic reaction to one of the fruits. As I was putting my shoes on near the door and grabbing my phone off charge at the kitchen bench, I saw movement in my fruit salad bowl I forgot to was. I peered over the rim and immediately my stomach dropped. You guessed it, there were spiders. Hundreds of spiders were crawling over the rim of the bowl onto the bench and floor. It looked like liquid spilling over the edges, but it was legs and it was traveling fast. I grabbed my phone and wallet and walked out, now calling 911 as I ran to the front of the building. Within 20 minutes an ambulance arrived and they promptly booked it to the ER where I had ultrasounds, a sonogram, and my stomach flushed. I then rang my mother, now around 6 a.m., and asked her to organize an extermination session for my apartment. She was confused at first, but after I told her the story she dialed it up and met me at the hospital, my father still asleep in bed. Turns out the strawberry seeds weren't seeds and were actually eggs. The sickness I was feeling was probably their little legs trying to climb out of my stomach after they hatched from the warmth. The bitterness I was tasking when I bit into that seed? Yeah. Spider baby goo. I stayed at mom and dad's for 2 weeks after that while my dorm aired out and the leftover babies were gassed. Moral of the story, fuck me for trying to be cheap and I'm never eating organic again. Who cares if I grow an extra toe from pesticides? I'd rather that than spider babies inside of me. Again. Story 3. Ever go to a strip mall after all the stores are closed? My husband and I have a strange tradition. A few times a week, we go walk around our local strip mall at night. It's a way for our kids to burn off some extra energy before bedtime. Just a quick little trip, then right to bed. Usually, a few stores are still open. But tonight, since it was Sunday, everything was closed. Still, we got the kids out and headed for the brightly lit walkway. "Ha, look," I said, pointing to the open sign at the thrift store. My husband shrugged. Maybe they're still open? I peered in at the dark store, the still rows of clothing hanging in the darkness. I doubt it. We continued down the sidewalk, past the seamstress/dry cleaning place. Clothing hung behind the counter, and a huge sewing machine sat in the window, the needle piercing a beige square of cloth. Ahead of us, one of the fluorescent lights was out. A patch of shadow, next to the butcher shop. We all stared in at the meats under the glass display, neatly packaged for tomorrow's customers. "Making me hungry," my husband said, and I laughed. The next store was one that had been out of business for a long time. There was no sign, just a blank space of faded concrete, with the ghost of the words barber. The windows were papered over, but they weren't always. Several months ago I remember looking in, at the darkened hallway that stretched to the back, at the small piles of leaves and debris that pooled in the corners. I wondered if the paper meant something was finally moving in. "Come on, you can run faster than that." I looked up. My husband and our 2 boys had already run far ahead of me. They were almost at the end of the strip mall, at the Wegmans. I took a final glance at the empty store, then ran after them. The Wegmans, which was usually open at this hour, was closed. Seeing the grocery store empty and dark was a little unnerving. Usually it was bustling with shoppers, even late at night. We then turned around and continued back towards the other side of the mall, towards our car. But when we passed the empty store again, I stopped. There was a rip in the paper. I stared at the window, my reflection looking back at me. Then I leaned forward. The rip was small, only about an inch wide. But it was big enough to see inside. I leaned in. But I didn't see a dark, empty store on the other side. I saw an eye. I leapt back and screamed. My husband and the kids came running. I stared at the hole, but there was no one there. Just darkness. I saw someone, I panted, pointing. Someone's in there. Watching us. I grabbed the kids' hands and broke into a run, nearly dragging them. My husband, confused, paused for a second, and then broke into a run after us. But as we passed the other stores, I saw things. The butcher shop. Someone was in there, standing at the meat table. His back was turned to us, but I heard the thump. 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 As he brought the cleaver down on the slab of meat in front of him. Then the sewing shop. There was someone sitting at the sewing machine. I heard the ch of the needle, threading up and down through the fabric. Except, was it fabric? Because as we passed, I realized the beige cloth was such an odd color. Pinkish beige, like the color of my skin. And then the thrift store. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, shapes, shadows, people moving towards the front door. Towards us. I pushed myself to run faster, my feet slapping against the sidewalk. The car was only 20 feet away, 15, 10. I pulled the doors open and forced the kids inside. Then I dove into the driver's seat. But as I started the car, my heart plummeted like an anchor. The strip mall was empty. I didn't see my husband anywhere. David? I screamed into the darkness. But there was only silence. I reported everything to the police. They didn't believe my story, but the more days that went by without him showing up, the more they had to admit he was actually missing. Theories like mugging gone wrong, hit and run, and left for the mistress were thrown around online and in town. But I know the truth. So please, I beg you, never go to a strip mall after all the stores are closed. Because, as it turns out, the stores aren't closed at all. Story 4. Shop of Illusions. The streets of New York were choked with humanity, a flowing river of souls seeking purpose, pleasure, and sometimes, escape. Walking among them, I found a narrow alley that was not on any map. The entry was concealed by the haunting shadows cast by the imposing skyscrapers, but curiosity, that insatiable itch, drew me in. In the middle of the alley stood an unassuming shop with the words Shop of Illusions etched in ornate, gold calligraphy above the door. There were no windows to peer into, only a sleek black door that looked as if it were made from shadows themselves. The hairs on my neck rose, but some inexplicable compulsion nudged me inside. The inside was unlike any shop I had ever seen. The walls pulsed with soft, iridescent hues, and the air carried a sweet, intoxicating aroma. Elegant glass cases displayed items that seemed to defy reality, a never-ending goblet of wine, a book whose characters leaped off the page, and a mirror showing not your reflection but your deepest desires. Ah, a new seeker. A silky voice spoke from the back of the shop. A tall, lean man emerged, his features sharp as if chiseled from granite. His eyes, however, were the most captivating, they danced with colors not known to the human spectrum. Welcome to the Shop of Illusions, where dreams are reality, and reality is just a plaything of the mind, he announced, gesturing grandly. I hesitated. Illusions? Yes, he smiled, revealing unnaturally perfect teeth. Here, we sell moments of respite from your world. Choose an illusion, indulge in it, and when it fades, return to reality, refreshed and invigorated. Curiosity piqued. What's the catch? His laughter was mellifluous, though it echoed oddly in the room. Ah, a smart one. Every illusion, like a dream, fades. But sometimes, when dreams end, the waking world seems different, more intense. It sounded innocuous enough. Temptation wrestled with caution. Before I knew it, I found myself handing over a not insubstantial amount of money for an illusion of an unforgettable night of passion and love. As the man crafted the illusion, the world around me blurred and shifted. I was transported to an idyllic beach at sunset, the sky a canvas of purples, reds, and golds. A beautiful partner, whose face seemed both familiar and unknown, appeared beside me. The night was everything I had hoped for: warmth, affection, laughter. For a brief moment, I felt complete. But as all dreams must, it ended. The sun rose, and with it, the illusion began to crumble, the colors fading, the touch turning cold. I blinked, and suddenly, I was back in the shop of illusions. The shopkeeper grinned, satisfaction evident. "How was it?" I nodded, a touch dazed. "Incredible. But now, I feel empty," he supplied. "Yes, that's often the effect. You see, when the illusion is so perfect, reality seems lacking." He was right. Exiting the shop, the bustling city felt drabber, more monochrome. The laughter of children sounded distant, food tasted bland, and every touch felt like a shadow of what I had felt in the illusion. A sinking feeling of dissatisfaction nestled within me. Days turned into weeks, and the allure of the shop of illusions grew impossible to resist. I returned, purchasing another illusion, and then another. Each time, the boundaries of reality and illusion blurred, and the world outside the shop became grayer, more muted. Each waking moment was tainted with longing for the next illusion. But one day, things took a sinister turn. Having spent nearly all my savings on the intoxicating illusions, I was desperate for just one more taste. I begged the shopkeeper for an affordable escape. After an eternity, he presented a tarnished silver key. "This key opens the door to the most powerful illusion yet. But remember, the greater the dream, the harsher the awakening." Without a second thought, I grabbed the key, and the world spun and twisted around me. I found myself in a magnificent mansion, surrounded by opulent riches. Servants awaited my every command, and every pleasure imaginable was at my fingertips. Days or maybe years passed in this illusionary paradise. But then, a nagging feeling began to creep in. A sense of being watched, hunted. One fateful evening, I stumbled upon a hidden chamber in the mansion. Inside, there was a grotesque gallery, walls adorned with paintings that shifted and squirmed. Each painting depicted a distorted, nightmarish version of my own face, contorted with fear and agony. A chilling realization dawned: this wasn't just an illusion. It was a trap. Desperate to escape, I sought out the silver key. The mansion began to transform, corridors elongating, doors disappearing, and shadows coming to life. Whispered voices and malevolent laughter echoed around me. Every corner I turned, I was met with nightmarish scenes: friends and family, their eyes hollow, mouths twisted into screams, reaching out with rotting hands. The world darkened, and an oppressive weight settled on my chest. Panic surged, each heartbeat echoing loudly in my ears. In the distance, I spotted the familiar glint of the silver key on a pedestal. Battling the terror and the grotesque apparitions, I lunged for it. The moment my fingers closed around the key, a searing pain shot up my arm, but I managed to turn it. Reality crashed back. The opulence of the mansion was replaced by the iridescent walls of the shop of illusions. Gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, I stumbled out, the silver key still clutched in my hand. But the world outside was no longer the one I remembered. The city streets, once bustling and vibrant, now seemed post-apocalyptic. Buildings crumbled, vehicles lay abandoned, and the few people I encountered had sunken eyes and gaunt faces. They shuffled aimlessly, their voices nothing more than hollow whispers. The most disturbing change, however, was the sky. It was a swirling vortex of inky black and blood red, casting the entire city in an eerie, pulsating glow. Horrified, I made my way back to the shop of illusions, only to find its door locked. Desperation mounting, I tried the silver key, and to my surprise, it fit. Inside, the shop was in chaos. The once beautiful displays were shattered, and the very walls seemed to weep. The shopkeeper sat hunched in a corner, a shadow of his former self. "What have you done?" he hissed, his once vibrant eyes now dull. "Me? What happened to the world?" He laughed, a sound devoid of any mirth. your insatiable greed for illusions tore a rift between reality and fantasy. Now, they're melding, blending, corrupting one another. I felt my knees weaken. How do we fix this? His gaze was filled with pity and regret. The balance must be restored. An illusion as potent as reality needs to counterbalance it. But I don't have any money left. No, not money, he said. Something much more valuable. Before I could react, he lunged at me, snatching the silver key from my hand. He whispered an incantation, and the key glowed with an ethereal light. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain in my chest. Looking down, I saw my heart, not of flesh and blood, but a vibrant, swirling nebula of colors, being pulled from my body. He placed it within the silver key and offered it to me. Your heart, your soul, the essence of your being, is now an illusion, a perfect counterweight to the corrupted reality. Your sacrifice will restore the balance. Everything went dark. When I awoke, I was back on the familiar streets of New York, bustling with life. The shop of illusions was gone, replaced by an ordinary wall. Yet, in my hand, I held the silver key, pulsating softly, my heart encapsulated within. As I walked the streets, I felt an eerie calmness. I could hear the rhythm of the city, the whispers of the wind, the heartbeat of the earth. I could taste the sweetness of the air and see colors more vibrant than ever before. Every sensation was amplified, intense, overwhelming. The world was no longer gray and muted, but unbearably real. Now, I am a wanderer, roaming the boundary of reality and illusion. In my chest is a void, an emptiness filled only by the faint pulsations of the silver key. And every so often, when the weight of reality becomes unbearable, I return to the illusions locked within my heart. But no matter how beautiful or enticing, they are but pale shadows compared to the terrifying beauty of reality. The price I paid in the shop of illusions was high, yet it has given me a lesson more valuable than any illusion. Reality, in all its raw, brutal, and breathtaking form, is the true magic. For what are illusions, but dreams that fade away, leaving us yearning for the harsh yet enchanting embrace of reality? Story 5. The Shop. The rain poured down on us from the darkness, only adding insult to our already soaked uniforms. I looked around, observing the crowd of fellow police officers on the street, all waiting for the signal to burst down the door in front of us. A small group of men dressed in completely black armor stood among us, apparently overseeing this joint operation. Nobody had ever seen them before, but nobody asked questions either. Wasn't our job. Stop shaking, one of them ordered me without saying another word. Mentally I sent cursed words back his way, but in reality I just nodded and looked away. We had been looking for this guy for so long, now was not the time to make a situation for something so meaningless. After 11 months, we believed we had finally pinpointed the man responsible for 15 murders over the last 2 years, and possibly more. Oddly enough, we didn't know where he lived, but he did own a well-known shop, the same shop we were now stood in front of. I reached for my neck in an attempt to firmly grasp my necklace, as that usually calmed me down. However, when I didn't feel anything, I remembered I had given it to my wife earlier in the evening. I silently cursed myself for giving to Annabelle on the evening I would need it the most, but it didn't matter. Necklace or not, we would end this tonight. It felt strange to stand in front of such a well-known and familiar building, and I could tell the others felt the same. We were used to busting down doors of old and abandoned farmhouses, but nothing like this. We were standing in a relatively large street, only empty because it was already 3 a.m. "We ready?" I heard one of the men holding the small battering ram ask. I could see he was nervous as well. We knew there were some sick freaks hiding out on the countryside, but to have one in the middle of our city was definitely an unwelcome feeling. My wife and I have bought things here quite frequently. Messed up to think this guy might have been the one we were looking for all this time. I couldn't tell who said it, but it didn't matter. We all silently agreed, and then focused on the door. The 2 officers holding the ram opened the door in one hit, and we subsequently all rushed inside. The sudden sound of a disturbed wind chime made one of the men jump, but he was quickly shushed by the others. There was some chatter on the radio, but I was too creeped out by this place to listen to it. It was a relatively small shop, but it was filled to the brim with the most strange and unusual items. There was no logic to the store, things were just scattered everywhere. Small statues, wristbands, even napkins, this place had the weirdest collection of items. I guess that was the charm of it, during the day at least. At night, in the dark, it was terrifying. "Fucking freaky mate," one of the officers said, his words apparently directed at me as he observed a small porcelain cat. He picked it up and turned it around for a bit, but then put it back. I didn't think of a response, so I just nodded in turn as I picked up an expensive-looking napkin. It was bright blue, and definitely looked like it would be a nice addition to a dining set. Shame there was only one, just like with every other item in the shop. It was always just one. "Oi, Agent Zaria, you still with us?" I heard one of the men dressed in all black armor ask. "We're not here to shop." "Yes, sir." "Let's go," I promptly responded, not feeling the need to question his authority. I had absolutely no clue who these guys were, or why they joined in on our operation, but it wasn't up to me to ask either way. We moved through the store, towards the door leading to the storage area in the back. If the bastard was anywhere near here, it was in there. On my way there, I noticed more things as my eyes wandered around. A purple rubber ducky, an old-looking red vase, a pipe, and a finely crafted bracelet, shining like a million stars. When we entered the storage room, now already filled with officers, the man dressed in black was stopped by one of his colleagues. They were speaking in a whisper, but I still managed to catch their conversation. "We're done here." Izav secured the canister. "We're leaving," the other man said. "What about the guy?" the man next to me responded. "Not our priority and not our concern. The police can handle that stuff." And with that, they suddenly left. Every member of their team left the shop without another word. I watched them leave, but my attention was quickly grasped by my superior calling my name from the storage room. I swiftly made my way there, and almost knocked over an entire shelf when I did. The storage room was filled with items, so much so that some of the officers had started to throw it all on piles at the sides to create more walking room. "We've got something I need your help with," my superior explained to me as he pointed to a small safe. I told him I was on it, and moments later the safe's secrets were revealed to us. We found no locations, no homes or addresses. Only some kind of manuscript. I opened it on an arbitrary page as I laid it down on a table, so my superior and a few others could look as well. A list. It was a list, filled with names and dates. On every row stood a different name. I flipped through some of the pages, and only saw more of the same. I recognized some of the names to be the victims, confirming we had been right. But where I recognized a few, there were so many more that I had never heard of. "Oh no," I heard my superior mutter under his breath before he immediately turned around, shouting at his men to stop. "Do not touch anything else," he yelled. "Everything in this store is now evidence, and our property. Don't fucking touch anything." He continued yelling, but my eyes quickly shifted back to the pages, curious to see what had triggered him. It didn't take long. Next to the names and the dates was another column, labeled gained. Next to every name was an item. A red antique watch. Brown vase with markings on top. Old blue napkin. "Fuck. These things," the man next to me whispered as he stammered back, as if he was afraid the things on the shelf were about to jump at him at any time. I looked around me, but where the items in the store had previously incited curiosity, then now made me sick to my stomach. There were so many of them. Too many. My head began to spin as the realization that every item equaled one life slowly started to set in. Around me, my superior was still shouting orders, but I didn't understand a single one. Officers cursed and shook around me as words spread fast, but I didn't notice. My eye had been caught by a small item laying on the shelf, one that was not covered by a thin layer of dust, but was shining in the dim light instead. With shaky hands, I approached the shelf. I felt my chest tighten as the item became clearer and clearer to me. I picked it up from the shelf and slowly looked at it. where holding it had always made me feel safe before, it now caused me to crash to the ground with fear, and I only managed to whisper her name. I felt sick to my stomach as I looked at the necklace in my hand. And tears started to form as I recognized it was my own, the very same I had given to my wife mere hours ago. Story 6. The Last Chance Shop. A long time ago, the mall in my town used to be the only one around for miles. People from all over would drive hours to wander around its sprawling hallways to gawk at the variety of shops and items. Those days have long passed. With the rise of the internet and online shopping, my town's mall has merely become a shell of its former glory. Once the big-name brands disappeared, people knew it was only a matter of time before the mall would close for good. I worked in that mall since I was 16 and was saddened to see it go. Even though I was almost finished with college, it was still a shame to see a part of my childhood disappear. But no matter how heartbreaking it was to see a landmark in my town vanish, that's not why I am writing this. The strangest thing happened about a month before the mall officially closed. A new shop emerged. I worked at the mall every day, and while I saw store after store close up shop, one day, with no hint it was coming, a brand new shop was in the mall. One day it was an abandoned spot in the mall, and the next, a fully stocked store was there. The shop was called Last Chance. Last Chance was filled with an array of items that made no sense. In the store windows was my mother's wedding ring I accidentally dropped down the sink as a child. A new vase identical to the one I'd accidentally broken sneaking in late after a wild night out. As well as my little brother's cherished signed baseball that I'd once destroyed in a fit of rage. When I saw those items, I called in sick. I was convinced I was dreaming or having a nightmare. However, the Last Chance shop was the only thing on people's tongues the following day. Each person saw different items in the shop that correlated to points in their lives. My neighbors bought plane tickets to a vacation they had to delay due to a death in the family. One of my friends bought back their grandma's engagement ring that a failed flame threw into the ocean. My dad brought home a puppy that his father accidentally ran over when my dad was 5. As for me, I knew that I had to go back to the shop. After hearing all the stories, I knew that I had to find what I was looking for. I had to bring back the one thing that meant the most to me. My biggest mistake. When I went into the shop, I found many spectacular things, but none were correct. I went day after day, hoping that it would eventually turn up. Finally, the last day the shop could be open, the employee revealed a back room. A room specifically designed for people like me to find their darkest secret, to get their last chance. When I walked into the room, I knew I had to escape because some things are so dreadful that people don't deserve last chances. When I was 10, my family went to a baseball game, my dad, mom, brother, and me. My brother was 5 years old and loved watching baseball with my dad. He knew all the players' names and wanted to go pro. During the game, a ball flew into the stands and landed right by the dad. Without a thought, he quickly handed it over to my brother, who glowed with joy. After the game, he begged our dad to bring him down to the team to get it signed. The players were hardly hotshots since it wasn't a big game and were thrilled to have someone ask for their signatures, and the whole team signed the ball. I was devastated that my dad hadn't even considered giving me the ball. In retrospect, I didn't like the game, and my parents had to practically drag me to it, but I was convinced in my child's mind it meant my brother was my dad's favorite. In a fit of jealousy, while my parents were distracted by some old acquaintances, they saw I tried to grab the ball from my brother. He quickly backed away from me, right into the path of an oncoming car. He died on impact. No one saw what had transpired beforehand, and it was ruled a tragic accident. Still, I knew better, and so did the little boy in the back room of the Last Chance shop with his mangled body still tightly gripping onto that baseball. I tried to run. I turned around only to see the door had disappeared. The only exit was behind my brother, the one I'd killed in a childish tantrum. I pleaded with him to forgive me, that it wasn't my fault, it was a fluke, the car just appeared. I didn't mean to. I was sorry. But he just gazed at me with eyes that used to glow with innocence, now as dull and dead as he was. Eventually, my senses came back to me. He was just a child. I was much larger and older now. I would simply walk around. I quickly discovered that was no child. The closer I got, the redder his eyes became until he held out the baseball as if to taunt me. I slowly started to back away, but the room had suddenly gotten smaller, and my back was against the wall in a fraction of the time I had taken to get where I was. In a panic, all I could see was my little brother as he wound himself up into a pitcher's stance and threw the ball. It was by mere luck it just hit my shoulder. But if by magic, the next moment it was in his hand again, and he was getting ready to make another throw. I knew I wasn't going to be able to last much longer. The room was getting smaller, and my shoulder was starting to hurt. In a distant part of my mind, I knew it was dislocated. In my last push of adrenaline, I was able to snatch the ball from my brother only to see a black hole appear in the floor the moment I did. He looked so angry. Not knowing why on instinct, I threw the ball in the hole, and my brother quickly jumped in after it. With the coast clear, I ran out of the exit. I'm back home now. I still can't quite believe what happened. If it weren't for my injuries, I would have thought it was all a bad dream. My parents are worried. They don't know why I'm injured and skittish. I don't know what to tell them. One thing I do know, however, is this: if a shop called The Last Chance shows up in your town inexplicably, stay in the front area, and avoid the back room at all cost. Better yet, maybe run away from it, far, far away. Story 7. I don't try on clothing anymore. I got lost in the dressing room of a Macy's when I was younger. I know that sounds stupid, or like something only an idiot or a drunk would do, but I did, and since then I could never try on clothing in the store. I was around 11, just old enough that my mom would let me browse the racks of the junior section without her constant supervision. The Macy's was huge, as all of them are, and attached to the decaying corpse of a once beloved shopping mall, as most of them are. At the time it had already become normal to me. Shopping malls had just begun to fall out of fashion in a big way, the peak of closings in the late 2000s. But my mom had hated it, complaining that when she was younger, malls were the hub of activity. I listened to her prattle with all of the obedience of a shy little girl who just wanted a pair of jeans from Justice. Even inside of a store full of people and things, there was an echo of emptiness from the mall just beyond the perfume section, and I kept far away from the entryway into the vast linoleum space. Of all things, that had given me the heebie-jeebies. My mother had pressed the emergency flip phone into my awaiting palm, kissed my forehead, and told me to meet her in half an hour, or we would not stop at McDonald's on the way home. It was always fun to act like an adult, browsing the clothes, pretending that I had the money to buy whatever I wanted. But I quickly grew bored when I remembered that my mother's only goal was to purchase a new dress for work, and that at best I could convince her to get me a tube of lip gloss or a pair of patterned socks. So I started to wander, fully aware of the time as my eyes kept darting to the flip phone, knowing I would have to find my mother the moment the half an hour was up. A few of the older women with bad hair that seemed to frequent Macy's eyed me with suspicion as I passed by them, but I kept my chin up and I flashed them polite smiles. It seemed to work, because none of them asked me where my mom was. I ended up in the prom section, my favorite part of any department store, where I browsed the dresses, feeling the material and envisioning myself in the giant gowns, prom queen with my handsome date. Sometimes I wished I could just be in high school already. One of the shorter dresses was in an extra small size, and on a whim, I decided to try it on. I had another 20 minutes, after all. The dressing room was quiet, save for the buzz of the fluorescents above my head, and the muted pop music playing over the crackling speakers. The dress fit me awfully, of course, too big on the bust, barely held up by the cheap spaghetti straps. I stripped it off, hung it back up, and opened the door to my dressing room. I couldn't remember which way the entrance was. The hall of dressing rooms was long, with that faded yellow look of the 90s, peeling wallpaper and all. It all looked the same, and oddly enough it all felt the same too. I went to the right first, and only found more rooms, the mirrors on the walls making it look endless. Then I turned back and went the opposite direction. Only there was no exit. I kept walking, my Crocs silent on the musty carpet, looking for the doorway back into the dress section. There was no door. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead and turned back again, wondering if I had missed it. I couldn't have missed it. but I had to have. Why would the door have disappeared? There was nobody else here. I saw no feet under the doors, heard no laughter or speaking. I didn't even hear anyone breathing. In fact, the music had even stopped, and the only sound was the white noise coming from the light fixtures. I was wasting so much time. I knew my mom would be so pissed if she couldn't find me. I had to get out. So I kept walking, waiting to hit the mirrors that waited at the end of the hallways, waiting to see my own reflection looking back at me, clutching the hot pink dress to my chest like a lifeline, waiting to see how silly I looked so I could realize that this was all just me being stupid. But I never hit the mirrors. Every time I thought I was nearing the end of a hallway, it kept going. There would be a small turn here or there alcoves with 3 mirrors to see yourself from all angles, but no exit. No door. No people. I felt a cold sweat break out on my brow. It was endless, there was nothing, nobody, it was just empty. Tears raised in my eyes, and I started to shake. I was almost too afraid to call out for help. What was I afraid of? I remembered the phone in my hand after the 3rd turn in the hallway, and I almost let out a cry of relief, but I flipped it open to see that there were no bars. No matter, I could still try. I pressed on the speed dial for my mom's number. It did not ring. I needed a better signal. I clutched the phone in my hand, no longer worried about making it to my mom on time, but worried about making it out. Where was the exit? Where were the red exit signs? Wasn't that like a law or something? The floor started to look more icky as I kept going, stains here and there, the wallpaper peeling more severely, the scent more and more stagnant. There was no point in going that way anymore, it was getting creepier going this way, so I decided that turning around and seeing what the opposite direction held would be better, or safer. So I turned around, following the long narrow hallway back from whence I came, but when I rounded the corner I found myself face to face with a wall. The hallway ended. I put my hand out tentatively, touching it. It was solid. Yellow and peeling, the buzz of the lights almost deafening. How had I hit a dead end when I had just come from that way? I could feel my breathing get more ragged, my hands were shaking. Where was the door? Why couldn't I find the door? Where was my mom? I turned and began to walk more briskly this time, praying that if I just powered through the gross parts, I could find the exit. There was only one way to go now, no turning back. It felt like I was wandering aimlessly before, but now I had a purpose fed by a fear I had never experienced before. It was almost primal. Why was I so afraid? I rounded yet another corner, the lights overhead starting to do that thing where they flickered enough to be annoying but not enough to put me into any darkness. The sound was more frightening than anything, the way the light would seem to die for a moment, the quiet followed by the resounding buzz. My eyes were still searching desperately for something else, a door, a window, anything different from the shades of yellowish beige that I had become so used to in such a short period of time. There was a difference, finally, something that drew my eyes to it, but it was not what I wanted. It wasn't a door, no, it was a set of feet visible underneath one of the stall doors. Black leather loafers, like something my dad would wear to work. I stilled my breathing, wondering if whoever it was could hear me, wondering why I was so desperate for this person to not hear me. Tears had been streaming down my face for a while at this point, there were little wet spots on my shirt to show for it. I felt for the first time in my young life, a fear of death. I glanced over my shoulder and almost let out a gasp. The wall was only a few feet behind me now. Following me, not letting me turn around. I would have to pass the stall with the person in it. I would have to keep going. I would have to be quiet. I needed to be quiet. I moved forward hesitantly again, but then I picked up the pace, weirdly thankful for the ugly green monstrosities on my feet, the silent rubber shoes, for keeping my steps muted. As I passed the door, I heard humming. A low, peppy tune. Masculine but not quite right. Like someone pretending to lower their voice. I picked up the pace again. I heard the sliding of a lock as they opened their door. I started to hyperventilate. The air smelled like dust, stale, with the edge of the perfume department in the distance. I let myself hope a little, wondering if that meant I was closer to the exit, closer to that scented oasis of adults and bright lights. Behind me I could still hear the creaking of the dressing room door opening. Whoever it was leaving, whoever it was going to have to follow me. There was a wall blocking the other direction after all. The footsteps behind me were heavy but distant. Slow, measured. I was on the verge of running, almost tripping as I turned each corner, wanting to stop to check the bars on my phone, but knowing that if I did, he would catch up to me. The only sounds I could hear was the humming of the man, the buzz of the lights, and the fall of his footsteps. It felt like I was a fly caught in a vase plant. We had just learned about those in school. It was like the dressing rooms were slowly digesting me. I let out a little sob, finally making noise. Although I hadn't wanted to, it just slipped out. Behind me I heard the footsteps get faster, like he was speed walking. I started to run. My sweaty feet slipping around inside of my shoes now with the pace of my steps. In my hand I held the phone like a vice grip, and in my other arm I kept the dress curled in tight like a baby blanket that could protect me from all the monsters under my bed. Not the monsters in the closet. I shook the thought from my head. My mind moving so rapidly I had no idea what to do. Rational thought was out the window. As I hurried my pace, the dress in my arms became more jostled, bouncing with each step. The hanger slipped off of the spaghetti straps, clattering to the ground and almost completely tripping me. Behind me I heard the heavy footfalls break into a dead sprint. I let out a scream of terror, knowing that nobody would hear other than the humming man. My body just begging to let out all of the pressure in my lungs. I could hear his humming so close it was like his head was resting on my shoulder, and since the hallway was endless, the man was so close, and I was so frightened I threw myself into the nearest dressing room, slamming the slatted wooden door behind me and locking it. I could see his feet on the other side as heavy fists slammed into the door. Over. And over. And over again. The whole room shook with the force of it, and still he hummed on the other side. I screamed again, and again, and again, throwing myself into the corner and hiding my face in my knees. I heard the door start to splinter, felt my throat start to become raw from the exertion of my screams, and then there was a rush of air as the door flew open. I kept my eyes closed tightly, face on my knees. His hands wrapped around my shoulders roughly, and I flailed, kicking and sobbing until I heard my mom's voice. "Renee. Renee. Baby. Are you all right? What happened?" I stopped my movement gradually, terrified that it was some trick, that once I stilled the man would be there, with an awful smiling face or empty eye sockets. But when I lifted my face from the dress, it was just the concerned visage of my mother in front of me, her eyes wide with panic, her nose a little red. She pulled me into a hug, which I returned tightly, sobbing into her shoulder. She stroked my back and hair, pulling me into her arms. It took a little convincing at first, but she led me from the dressing room. 3 rooms down on the right was the exit, leading into the prom section. I clung to her tightly the whole way. We left immediately, her dress forgotten. She got me McDonald's and wasn't even angry at me for going to a part of the store I wasn't supposed to go to. I couldn't stop crying, telling her I was lost and scared, and that I couldn't find an exit. She hushed me, and promised to never leave me alone again in a store. She promised that we would never go back to that Macy's. I calmed down a little after that. We didn't speak much about the trip after we got home. She let me sleep in bed with her and Dad for at least 2 weeks afterwards, but she couldn't understand why I had been so scared. According to her, I had only been gone for 10 minutes longer than we agreed, even though it felt like hours to me. I stopped going to malls, to department stores, or anywhere that had dressing rooms in it. I went to therapy, and they told me that I had likely had a panic attack when I couldn't find my mother. But I know that isn't the truth. I know there's something wrong with that place. In fact, 7 months after my episode, a little boy went missing in those very dressing rooms after he wandered off from his parents. The security footage only showed him and one man wearing all black entering the dressing room. And neither of them ever came out.